Hello and welcome to World Insight on CGTN from Beijing. I'm Tian Wei. Last week's two sessions, the annual political gathering in Beijing, was a key moment to assess China's economic health and its future direction. Despite not setting a GDP target in the wake of the coronavirus pandemic, China is still eyeing economic growth this year. But one reality we have to face is that demand overseas remains extremely weak as the pandemic virtually hit the whole world, and domestic demand hasn't picked up to the level that we want yet. So, what is the state of the Chinese economy? In the past decades, the country has had robust year-on-year GDP growth. What do we make of this year's change? I asked all of these questions to Yichen Zhang, founder and chairman and CEO of CITIC Capital, the China International Trust Investment Corporation, for answers. Mr. Zhang, as an investor, how do you look at this both challenge and opportunity time for you? I mean, when it comes to rescue financing, emergency funds, and dealing with the debts those companies have and buying out.
It is a severe blow. We have many portfolio companies in China, and they are affected to varying degrees. Some of them, for example, like McDonald's, initially it went down as much as almost 50% in terms of sales in February, but it has been recovering very gradually, and initially, but later on very rapidly. At this point, we're over 95%, in terms of the sales relative to the last year, and that's tremendous recovery, and mainly due to the digital infrastructure in the country, as well as we put in, for example, delivery and mobile order and contactless pickup together account for over 70% of the business. That has enabled the company, McDonald's, to recover so quickly. But on the other hand, we have other companies in tourism, offline education, and those companies are going through a very hard time. And we work with local governments, we work with the banks in terms of restructuring, and so far, obviously there were very hairy moments, but we are able to weather through it. And just based on my, anecdotal experience, also doing the CPPCC, talking to many other colleagues in the economic sector, because the bankruptcy process in China is not as straightforward as in the U.S. or other developed countries, because it's a fairly drawn-out process. So when you indicate it that you may be going down, this is when the help will actually come in. So instead of a blanket sort of a relief effort, which the U.S. and Europe was doing, China can be more targeted and trying to help only the companies that's about to buckle under the pressure. So it's more precise in some ways.
Do you see that kind of precise structure in terms of rescuing and support to companies already being established?
I think every level of government is clearly tasked with protecting employment, protecting jobs as the top priority. There's no doubt about that. So in some ways, China is a more of a top-down sort of a political structure. At this point, if you look at it, how China has weathered through this, pandemic economically, I would say the ordinary people, sort of took care of themselves in some ways, because China has higher level of savings, and China has a better family support system. That's the first level. And then the second level is the companies. Companies, I haven't really heard that many companies who are announcing openly and laying off people simply because the pressure from the government and the social pressure as well. So the companies are really bearing a great burden and bearing the brunt of this impact. But if there are, I mean, there's only so much you can do if you got no money left and you have to close up. And that's when the government will coordinate the banks to come in to help. I've been through the process on one of our portfolio companies, and I've heard many other cases. So the rumor of a widespread unemployment is perhaps exaggerated because the pressure overall on the company and the help it's getting if it's in critical conditions are helping, sort of saving jobs.
At this year's annual political season, Mr. Zhang, as a CPPCC member, submitted 11 written proposals which touch on hot-button issues such as financing, small and micro enterprises, talent building of the Guangdong, Hong Kong, Macau, Greater Bay Area, enterprise load reduction, and many others. He also mentioned state-owned capital supervision in his proposal. How can modern management systems help turn around state-owned enterprises? That's a topic people have been debating for a long time. So what are the takeaways from these proposals, and how could they help to improve the current economic reality in this country? Let's listen to him once again. You suggested this year that the state-owned enterprises, the large ones, they should abide by the principles of a modern management system. The board should serve its purpose. Exactly what you meant, and how is that likely to interact with the current economic situation China is facing? So is the realities of Chinese companies.
Well, Chinese government has been promoting this mixed ownership reform of state-owned companies. And however, the specific rules on post these reforms of these companies, how the company should be governed. Mainly in the case of if the state remains the dominant shareholder, meaning that owning, owning more than 50% of the company, then it's very clear it still needs to follow the state-owned asset sort of decision-making process. However, in many cases, in the case that the state owns less than 50%, as opposed to it's only a shareholder like all the other shareholders, then the company should be governed more by the corporate laws that governs all the other companies. So I'm not saying it is not, but we need very clear guidelines so that there's no confusion.
What kind of guidelines exactly are you referring to? What details do you think are extremely necessary now?
I think as more and more of the SOEs are going through the mixed ownership reform, we need, clearer guidelines from, for example, the state administration of state-owned asset, SASAC, which is under the State Council. I think that part needs to be clear.
Another thing you mentioned earlier, sir, which is about some of the businesses you are running, including the food and beverage companies, suggesting that the new technologies are helping you to weather the storm right now. Now, would that give you a second thought as to where to invest for the future, and also how the existing companies are having to restructuring them in the near future?
Generally, I think China was able to weather through this pandemic, because of the effective control measures. But at the same time, when you control, people still need to live, and you need to be able to, to get food, to get basic services. And this is where the digital infrastructure came in. And luckily, China was, in the past 5 years, had a booming infrastructure in digital, business, and you have delivery everywhere. Everything is online, and I think that trend will continue. And just like in the U.S. and everywhere else, and this pandemic will force many businesses online, and China is well positioned for that. And you're going to see gains of online companies further, and that is a direction for our future investment, and many, helping many businesses moving not just from the 2C sector but to the 2B sector to have their business online in digital form, and and then building up the logistic infrastructure as well, and plus I think there is technology decoupling that's going on with the U.S. and which will help some of the Chinese players who could replace unreliable vendors from the U.S. and so these are the directions and focus for our investment.
Talking about the infrastructure investment, may I just follow up on one thing? According to the government work report, likely to be new infrastructure investment, which could include basic infrastructure investment together with integrated infrastructure investment and what they call innovative infrastructure investments. Now, these are abstract categories. Which specific category and which specific content could help you and your business as you just analyzed?
Well, as China further improves its digital infrastructure, which is all the things that you mentioned, 5G, with more data centers and AI and Internet of Things, I think obviously all the entire digital infrastructure will be greatly improved, even better than now, and that will position China at the forefront of that, the sort of a revolution or movement ahead of all the other countries.